Jake Hefner and Dale Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, the Chargers have returned back to OTAs this week. And like I always say, Dan Wolkenstein plus a phone plus whoever ends up being on the other line, magic things tend to happen. And today, Dan Wolkenstein has made another one of those magical things happen today. Dan Wolkenstein, if you would, special guest joining the show today is none other than who?
Hayley, Elwood, Chargers team reporter, friend of the show, has been with us, I think, every year since we have done this show, which now goes back 5 years, which is insane. Joins us on the show today. Lots to discuss. We'll talk about her recent conversations with Ladd McConkey and Junior Colson. Talk about Justin Herbert and this new era of Chargers football under Jim Harbaugh. Jesse Minter. We'll talk about the offensive line. Alex Leatherwood. We'll talk about all kinds of stuff, as well as what to expect moving forward with maybe some positions that may still need to be filled. All of that and more with Hayley Elwood, Chargers team reporter. But Jake, before we get to that, let's pay the bills. Talk about our friends.
I want to remind everybody that BetOnline is your number one source for all of your summer sports this season, including baseball, golf, NBA, and NHL playoff stats. All the latest stats, news, and scores available for you to follow for all of your favorite teams. Get in on the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds for just about every sport out there. Head on over to the website today. That's betonline.ag, or use your mobile device to get in on the action. BetOnline, use the promo code UNLEASH. Tell them that Chargers Unleashed sent you. That's BetOnline, where the game starts.
Hayley Elwood from your Los Angeles Chargers joins us next on Chargers Unleashed. Well, Chargers fans are very excited these days. They got a brand new head coach, new facility coming up. OTAs are well underway. Exciting today as well for Chargers fans. We have a wonderful special guest, friend of the show, Hayley Elwood, Chargers team reporter, joins us here on Chargers Unleashed. Hey, Hayley, thanks again. Friend of the show, as always. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. We're doing our little annual chit chat right now. Very excited to be on and join the two of you and talk some Chargers here.
Gotta do it in this time of the year. Gotta do it in this time of the year.
Yeah.
Change, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about.
Yeah, all of us have our tan lines flowing. Excited to see what it looks like now and the end of the season. So I'm sure they look very different. Lots to discuss today with you, Hayley. Excited for this one. We'll talk about your conversations with Ladd McConkey and Junior Colson as of late. Get some of your observations about this new coaching staff and some of the players and storylines. But you were there at OTAs this week. What are your kind of key takeaways or thoughts or observations you had from this week out there in Costa Mesa?
Yeah, I will say this. This is my 11th season covering the Chargers, being with the team. And when I started with them in 2014 back in San Diego, I don't even think I was as dependent on a roster as I was yesterday, of looking at numbers to players on the field and comparing who's in what. I mean, Denzel Perryman's not like, hello, 6, I think is what we're working with now, obviously with Khalil Mack and 52. So there's just so much, there's been a lot of turnover. Obviously it's, you can't understate that. And so when you actually see everyone out there and you see a brand new coaching staff that now is able to interact with these guys on the field and go through drills with them and go through everything, this is the start of the 2024 Chargers. And we really have seen that. I obviously missed the first week of OTAs, but I was there yesterday, as you mentioned. And it is just a really, really interesting team to actually start to get to know, if you will. There has been so many different things that have happened between new coaches, new players, and all this stuff. But now you're seeing it kind of come together. And it still is obviously super, super early. I mean, we can't make a lot of predictions right now as to how this roster is going to shake out by any means. But what I will say is to get everyone on the field, they've had great attendance. It's awesome seeing guys like Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa out there, especially during OTAs when this is a voluntary time as well. But when all these things happen, it's just been really good to see. And it was kind of fun to just sort of like, again, see the little seeds kind of start to get planted here for what's going to come in 2024.
Yeah, and I will say, I think you're spot on. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at some of the photos from the team as they've come out, and I have to reference the roster numbers. I'm like, wait, yeah. 6, 1, 9, who's 0? Who, like, I don't remember how many, or another season where I've had to do that more than now. And it speaks to this is a new team and it's a new era, and it's going to take some time, and they're not done. We just saw Alex Leatherwood was just signed yesterday. So, you got a chance to speak with a few of the players and some that are very exciting for Chargers fans. A new wide receiver, possibly wide receiver 1 of the future for Chargers, and Ladd McConkey. And then the linebacker who Jake and I have been gushing over and believe will have arguably more impact than any other rookie drafted by any team, not a quarterback, because of what he is bringing from Michigan. You got a chance to kind of sit down with both of them. What were some of your takeaways with Ladd and with Junior Colson?
So I'll start with Ladd, and not just because he went first when we literally sat down with them. I think it's important to really stress the impact that playing at Georgia has had on him. And obviously you can look at guys that come from big schools and the production they had and be like, oh yeah, I mean, obviously it's a D1 program. He's won national championships, like all these things, right? But what he talked about with me was specifically how his versatility is something that he really honed at Georgia, that it was because at Georgia, they moved him around so much that that's how he became this true inside-outside kind of dual threat receiver. He wanted to be on the field any way he possibly could. So with that, it was, hey, put me wherever and I'll make something happen. And so when I asked him, well, do you feel more comfortable at one space or another? He told me, no, it's really just where can I be to make a play? And I think that's huge now coming into this Chargers offense, because he also is someone who's been described as very quarterback friendly. And now being paired up with Justin Herbert in this new offense, that's going to be really key. And he said these reps that they're getting right now are obviously extremely critical. As I kind of talked earlier about the seeds kind of starting to be sown, this is where you're going to see that camaraderie develop. The other thing about Ladd McConkey that I didn't learn until I was researching him is that he was a former quarterback, and he tried a couple times to throw that ball at Georgia, but the plays broke down, and he said he would love to throw a touchdown, but he goes, let's catch one first and then we'll see what happens. But I think that also bodes like a really interesting perspective as a wide receiver on the field. When you've been under center throwing to guys like that, you're now on the receiving end, and maybe there's some vision there that he has from his previous experience playing quarterback that can help him as well. When it comes to Junior Colson, when the Chargers drafted him as a sports like media member, he is like a reporter's dream, because you have this super talented football player with this incredible backstory and everything that he's had to overcome in his life, growing up in Haiti, his father passing away, being orphaned, being adopted, coming to the US, not knowing a lick of English, playing football, not knowing English. I mean, it's incredible when you see what he had to overcome to be who he is today, both as a player and also a person.
Just to get there. Yeah.
Just to get there. And I think what you mentioned, and bold prediction, by the way, about the impact that you think he's going to make. But I think obviously the Chargers loved him and thought he was super talented to draft him. But that Michigan tie is extremely critical, I firmly believe, in terms of this defense. You have Joey and you have Khalil and you have Derwin and you have these veterans who have been in the NFL now for a very, very long time. But this defense is new. But Junior Colson has played in it. He knows it. He's the guy who Jesse Minter's asking, telling him to answer questions. And he's the guy who's making calls out there right now when he's been out and been healthy. I know he's working off to the side currently, but he'll get back to that. But I think all of that knowledge is so critical to almost kind of help him be this glue guy to sort of bridge the gap between maybe the veteran players who are learning it and the younger guys who are learning it, to be that guy who's been in the system before. And I think that's going to be extremely critical as they move forward on building this defense into minicamp, into camp, and into the season too.
And one piece that I listened or watched your piece with Junior Colson, and the part that I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on was when he was talking about, you had asked him about like the Jesse Minter excitement and him being so excited to kind of just keep building on that with him. And in talking about the Jesse Minter defense and why he's excited, talking about learning concept versus play calls and the importance of communication. From your experience in years past, maybe covering the team, play calls versus concepts, is that new? Is that different? Like, how do you see that impacting on-field production?
I've never heard anyone so explicitly discuss the C word versus the P word, the concepts versus the play calls, in terms of these are things that we are learning. Yes, there's a play that's going to be called based off these concepts, but we are creating concepts, as Jesse Minter told me, to allow the players to understand conceptually what they are supposed to be doing. And it is this philosophy, if you will, of being able to create concepts, and concepts could be coverages, disguises, whatever it might be, and how to apply those week to week in terms of who your opponent is. And with that comes another C word, which is communication. And that is something that Junior Colson told me, because look, I asked him, to your kind of question, Dan, it's like, I don't play football. So what does this mean? And who better to ask than someone who's actually been in the defense before? And he told me these concepts also go along with communication. And he said, comms are paramount in this defense. It is so important to communicate, because you have to understand what you're doing, what everyone else is doing. But as Jesse Minter told me, it's never too much. They make it so digestible, because the goal is to take what you do and you build it around your best players and their best attributes. So these are all things that sound phenomenal. They sound really great, and they worked out really well at Michigan. And so now you're going to kind of see this in the NFL. And one thing that Jesse Minter had told me too is they actually feel in the NFL, there's a little more of, because you know who you're going to be playing every week, whereas college, like, players can rotate. There's so many different guys on teams. In the NFL, you pretty much know, granted, given catastrophic injuries here or there, who you're going to be facing. So he kind of feels like it's going to be a little more applicable and a little more easier is not the word I want to use, but attainable to kind of use these concepts now in the NFL, where you kind of know who you're going to be playing week after week. And so I think all of that is super interesting. And Chargers defensive line coach, I wrote a note, Mike Elston said yesterday that Minter is the best game day coordinator he's ever been around, which is super high praise. And that's something I think that, yeah, you said Chargers fans should get excited about, because that's what this comes down to, right? Winning on game days and having a plan. And we'll see how it all shakes out. But I think this philosophy now, and I think, again, it kind of goes back to the importance of having someone like Junior Colson, who has been in this system before, being able to kind of understand and explain to maybe some players who might not get it quite yet, how it's all going to shape out.
Hayley, this is the first time that we've had you on since Jim Harbaugh was named the head coach of the Chargers. And since his arrival, the coaching staff has been retooled, rebuilt in his image, along with Joe Ortiz. This team has now been rebuilt and retailored into the vision that he wants for what he's going to put out there on the field. And we've seen some little nuances here, even from Ben Herbert talking about attention to detail and some of the drills that we've been seeing out there in practice. Just from your perspective so far, what do you see have been the biggest changes, and whether it's just the little things to the big things to the message that's been putting out there on the players? What's your perception on everything that's taken place thus far?
I think we're seeing a new kind of culture take place here within the Chargers. And that culture kind of comes down to this team means business, and this coaching staff means business. And I laughed because Denzel Perryman was at the podium a week ago or so, and he was like, this thing's a whole different structure. And he goes, look, I wasn't here the last couple of years, but Jim Harbaugh has a whole different structure. And someone had asked him, were you asking questions about the defense? And he's like, no, I'm just asking about running, like how much running we're doing right now. Did you guys do this at Michigan? Because holy moly, this is new. There were some different drills that we saw at OTAs. There were some different kind of nuances. One kind of cool thing too, when the players are stretching, it's just the strength and conditioning staff that's on the field with them. And then all the assistant coaches and position coaches kind of hang out to the side. And then when it's time to get into actual practice, they all ran out. And I had asked someone who had been at Michigan, is this something that they did? And they told me no, but it's kind of just this like hype too that was like brought to a May practice. Like it was May 29th yesterday, and these guys are revved and ready to go. So
with no music.
Yeah, with no music, yes, no music. That has also been a thing. And full uniforms, mind you. There were no pads that were on yesterday, but if you go to chargers.com, you kind of like look through photos or through the photo gallery, shout out Ty Nowell and Mike Nowak, our awesome team photogs, you will see these guys are in jerseys and pants. We are not wearing shorts right now. And I think that's kind of a signifier of that means business. And someone had told me at Michigan, it was practice what you play in. And that's kind of a philosophy that's sort of being, again, plant the seeds now. These guys are getting ready for a game day on May 29th. And I think one other thing I kind of noticed too was there's this also very like hands-on element that's happening. And it's not that other coaches in the past have not been hands-on, and I'm not saying that by any means, but really yesterday, again, with coaches being out there with the players and seeing it all kind of work together, I was very curious as to like, what is this collaboration like? And you see Nick Hardwick really getting in there. I think Hardwick would probably want to still play center if he could, and he's just like in there with the guys. And Jim Harbaugh with the quarterbacks. At one point, he was working with a undrafted rookie quarterback, Casey Bauman from Augustana. By the way, great song Boston from that band in the mid-2000s, Augustana, if that rings any bells. Anyway,
it does.
Working with him like on a couple step drops and different footwork and things like that. And I just thought that is so cool to have a guy like Harbaugh, obviously, working with an undrafted rookie quarterback and really taking the time to work with him, to pull him aside, to work on things with him. And so I think you're seeing all of this, again, just kind of come together. But there are certainly some definite different nuances that we have not seen with the Chargers. And I think it's going to be tough. I think, we've seen the strength and conditioning staff. They mean business. And it's going to be really interesting when camp rolls around, kind of what that format is like and how different that's going to be to different Chargers teams in the past. But I think now it's getting these guys in this mindset of getting ready to go. And even like if that means you're wearing something that you're going to be wearing similarly in the fall, let's put it on now and just see what happens, because we're ready to go even out here in May.
It is interesting. It is interesting you mentioned the collaboration. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, Jake, but it resonated with me because I was listening to Bud Dupree talk yesterday, and he was saying how it was wild seeing Jim Harbaugh like on the sleds or whatever it was, like in the fire. He's not used to that. And you remember seeing that with Mike Vrabel back in the day when he was with him. And then you hear in your interview with Junior Colson talking about Navarro Bowman, who thinks he could still play and get after it sometimes, and Nick Hardwick. And in all of this, it feels so much more energetic and lively and collaborative that we were just not used to that. And the group think, I think, is something that gets a lot of people excited, and no one's above anything else, and they're all in it together, it seems. So no, I'm 100%. You're right.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think too, when you look at some coaches like Bowman, like Hardwick, former players, Bowman specifically, who played under Jim Harbaugh, these guys are not that far removed from NFL, from their playing days in the NFL. So you kind of have also this like age gap that's almost being bridged with, even though Junior Colson was like making fun of Navarro Bowman, like, or he says like I gotta
blurry.
Tweak him down. However, I did not realize that Navarro Bowman and I are the exact same age. And if I knew that in that interview, I would have been like, whoa, buddy, let's not, let's respect our elders here.
Shots fired at your interviewee.
But you see that, and I think it's cool to have these guys kind of relate, and then specifically someone like Navarro Bowman, who knows the exact teaching philosophies, who has been and worked under Jim Harbaugh before, can now implement that to his position group as well.
You mentioned Jesse Minter just a couple of minutes ago, Junior Colson's relationship with him. I wanted to talk about just in terms of his plan overall as a defense. You had mentioned the comments that Mike Elston had made yesterday at the podium. I remember comments that he had even made during the national championship week when he talks about best timing of the right play to dial up for what Jesse Minter brings to the defense. And now that you have new personnel, this defense as a whole, he kind of got what he wanted by having Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and Tuli being able to all get an opportunity to coach them. But I wanted just to get your thoughts on, what do you think are the three biggest things that Jesse Minter wants to accomplish with his defense? We know he wants to get after the quarterback. We've heard some comments from Steve Klingscale talking about stacking in terms of being versatile in the secondary. But from your understanding, your perspective, and your talks around the team, what do you think are probably the three biggest things that he wants to accomplish with his defense?
Yeah, I think it's getting after the quarterback. I think it's also staying connected on your assignments. And then I think from almost a philosophical standpoint, it's not giving guys too much where they feel overwhelmed. And specifically, we talked a couple months ago about Derwin James and how Derwin is just this incredible player. I mean, he can do everything, but is that a good thing? You know what I mean? Is it good to have someone like that be able to do all these different things? Or should we tap in to what he does best and kind of leave him with that? And I think that is what you're probably going to see a lot with these players too, is them really doing what they do best and being able to hone those skills and being able to almost play freely. I think he told me it's like 50% what we play, but 50% how we play as well with this defensive scheme. And so all of that kind of coming together, I think is just going to bode for a really interesting defense that is, predicated on disguise and different coverages and being able to kind of, maybe keep people off their game. I mean, that's something we also talked about is like, look, I asked him point blank, you got to Michigan and the goal was we need to beat Ohio State. Well, now that you're in the NFL, the Chiefs are in your division and they're going for the three-peat this year. So like, how do you do that? And he goes, and he's like, but look, we're up for the challenge. And I think I've also never really heard someone be so candid about something like that, that you know that this is your biggest, it's the AFC's biggest opponent, but they are literally your biggest opponent because they are in your division. And so even to win the West, you know, you're always going to be fighting with them. And so to be able to kind of put that all together, I think is going to be really, really interesting. But yeah, I think it's all those things that you and I kind of both talked about. And again, it's that big picture view of really sort of getting everyone to kind of see things from a higher level, but make it easy to digest. And then that way, when they go out on Sundays, they can play free. They can apply these concepts. Maybe they applied it one way one week. We're going to switch it around, apply it this way this week, and really see what happens. This is an interesting schedule for this team this year. You know, the NFC South is not particularly the greatest division in the league, but, you know, and also finishing last in your division, like, look, it sucked, obviously, but you were able to get a good player in the draft, and maybe that kind of helps you schedule-wise with teams that you're stacked against because they are also like the lower level of their divisions. But we'll see how it all comes together. But I think it's something that's kind of really exciting to see how it all plays out and see maybe some of what we saw at Michigan now translate to the NFL.
We're talking to Hayley Elwood, Chargers team reporter. If you're tuning in on ESPN, you could listen to or watch the full episode on YouTube or anywhere you find your podcasts. Hayley, a couple more for you. I always love getting team perspective from folks who are in the building constantly because so much can be put out there on video and on pictures, but the real stories and understanding from people who have conversations, I think is what really helps me understand this team more. So thank you. You mentioned earlier, it's so hard when there's so many new players on a team to kind of get a feel for just how much has changed. And it's amazing the overhaul that we've seen. And there's so much that they had to do, but I think we all would agree that the job is not done. Mm-hmm. And there are still some, in my opinion, positions that could probably use some more work. In terms of like missing pieces or maybe the components, because we know they couldn't get everything done in 1 year.
Totally.
There's no way. But in your opinion, like what are some of the missing pieces or components that this team may still be either going after now or maybe in a year that you think can kind of bring this whole thing together that may not currently have on the roster?
Yeah, I think maybe if you look at position groups, maybe cornerback is one that job isn't totally finished yet for this season. And obviously you added a couple guys in the draft. You brought on Christian Fulton in free agency, but I don't know. It kind of still feels like there could be some work that could be done there, at least maybe finding some. There's still a lot of big veteran names out there. Xavier Howard, Stephon Gilmore, like older players, obviously, but maybe just some veteran depth, which we've seen this team bring in now over these last couple of weeks with some different positions. So I think that could kind of be one. You know, obviously they've done a lot of work with the offensive line. They've done a lot of work at receiver and things of that sort, but I kind of feel like corner, and I don't know, maybe there's also some safety position flexibility that's on this roster too, that could possibly trend in the cornerback direction. But I kind of feel like when you look at a position group, that for me is sort of where maybe that work isn't quite complete. But Joe Hortiz has said this is not a draft project. This is not a free agency project. This is not a get to week one project. This is a continuous churn is the word. And I'll probably bring that up again later throughout this conversation that he used to constantly churn this roster and make it the best it can possibly be.
You were mentioning Joe Hortiz and what he's done with the roster. One thing that he and Jim Harbaugh have obviously talked about is competitors welcome, bringing in competitors, building out the bottom of that depth of the roster. And given that, and especially even given now that you have so much turnover in a year from a coaching and player perspective, which players do you feel are entering this season with a chip on their shoulder, with something to prove? Or which ones would you say which ones would you possibly say that are primed for a possible breakout season this year?
Mm-hmm. I think there are two obvious answers, and they're both in the same position group. And I think it's Quentin Johnston and Brenden Rice. And so I think I'll talk to Johnston first. And I just think, you know, obviously we've heard specifically Hortiz, like they're not giving up on him and they're ready for him to kind of take that next step. And maybe a fresh start within this offense, this new offense is something that could truly help him. I think Brenden Rice is like the obvious answer when you talk about like chip on the shoulder, and shout out Jeff Miller for that incredible headline of the year. Steamed rice could feed sons hunger to thrive a couple weeks ago.
I have not seen that.
You didn't see that?
Jeff.
Fantastic.
Jeff, get that Pulitzer, man. Look, we don't usually talk about 7th round receivers. We don't. Like it's and the Chargers have taken a couple in years past every now and then, and they haven't panned out. That's the reality of the situation. It is a steep, steep climb. And obviously we talk about him because of his family name. He did go to USC and was very productive there. But I think we know the story, obviously, slipping to the 7th round. I think, though, the reason we also talk about him is because this wide receiver room is very different and there's possibly a lot of competition there. And I think he could maybe be someone who could break out, but he has to be able to do the work. And that's actually something that he told Gilbert Manzano from SI. I think Gil was at the rookie premiere and kind of asked Brenden about working with Jim Harbaugh. And Brenden told him, yeah, I went over to Harbaugh and I was like, hey, man, I'm going to be sticking around. And Harbaugh, I guess, looked at him and said, okay, yeah, you talk about it, but go do it. Like, you need to go do it. Actions speak louder than words. And so that is where now, though, we will have to see over these next couple months. And I think in the preseason is going to be really big too, which preseason for me is going to be very interesting. Like, are the starters going to play? Like, there's so many questions that are going to happen there for me personally. But I think those two guys specifically, and I think that also just kind of though speaks to the wide receiver room as a whole right now and how different it is. Obviously, you lose Keenan and you lose Mike, but how much competition there might be for some guys to actually like carve out key roles in it.
Jim Harbaugh has not minced words since he arrived that the number one priority for him was to protect Justin Herbert and rebuild this offensive line, make it stronger. Obviously, they did that with selecting Joe Alt with number 5 overall in the NFL draft. And they've done some retooling a little bit, as it looks like, in OTAs thus far, still trying to find that right starting 5 combination. We've seen times where Trey Pipkins is kicked inside to right guard and Joe Alt is playing out there at right tackle with the ones. We've seen a rotation with Jamari Sawyer at right guard, right tackle. You brought in Alex Leatherwood yesterday to, again, reinforce this offensive line. Obviously, Bradley Bozeman, a new center. What do you take away from this is just in terms of still kind of putting forth the message that Jim Harbaugh has set forth in terms of just wanting to make this the strongest that it could be as it relates to the offensive line? But do you see any particular combination that you're in favor of?
It's too soon, man. No, I'll say this. I think that I think the right guard competition is going to be a huge, huge competitive spot once we get into camp. And Joe Alt has been, to your point, kind of working in, like starting with the 2s, working into the 1s, going back to the 2s. And so there's been some, obviously as a rookie, he's kind of learning. They're trying to ease him into that at tackle and whatnot. But I do think that the right guard is going to be a key position battle come training camp. And I think it's all about finding that best starting 5 and finding the most also physical starting 5 too. We've heard about the physicality. We know this team wants to be tough in the trenches. It is being made up front right now. And so I think all of that is something that's probably just going to kind of have to come together over these next few months. We get into mini camp obviously here in about 2 weeks, then they take the 6-week break and then they get back into it. And so I think all of that though is going to be interesting. But I think, bringing in guys like Leatherwood again, churn, baby, churn, like that is the point of this, and can he be someone who can kind of stick around as maybe like a 7th offensive lineman on this group and just sort of rotate in if need be. But I think they are just looking, like we said, this project is not done. And a project is a negative term, but I should say this team for 2024 and building this team is not done by any means. And so I think we'll see. I think that left side is pretty locked down on the line right now. Bozeman's likely going to, be the center. They're working together, obviously, but that right side is where some questions are probably going to have to kind of be decided over these next few months.
You said project, and it was perfect timing because, it's a work in progress, obviously, but as much as, and there's a ton of excitement and there's a lot of reason for that. And this team has done a lot to kind of silence a lot of the naysayers and silence a lot of the people that were maybe doubting what they could possibly do, because they've really hit it out of the park so far, at least from what we've seen or what I believe. But I have noticed that there's a lot of what I call reclamation projects that have been brought in to this team, whether it's J.K. Dobbins because of the injury stuff or Christian Fulton because of his time in Tennessee and maybe just needed a new change of scenery, or Bradley Bozeman with his time in Carolina versus in Baltimore, where maybe he had to kind of step down. Hayden Hurst, now Alex Leatherwood. Mm-hmm. And there's the volume of those types of players seems to be pretty high. And maybe that was required because of the cap situation, because of how many holes they had. But it feels like there's a lot of stock and a lot riding on those guys being reclaimed versus where they were previously. Mm-hmm. Is that maybe a bit of a risk? Like, is that something that we should be cognizant of and maybe cautiously optimistic for? Like, what do you make of the volume of those types of players being brought in?
I think a lot of those players that you specifically named have ties to Joe Ortiz, or maybe some of, like the Baltimore regime that's now kind of been brought in out here, out west, if you will. And so I think, to me, that signifies that there is a trust and a faith there in terms of, hey, I know this guy, I know what he's capable of, and now we're going to bring him into this system and hope that he can grow and, like you said, kind of like reclaim that sort of position or talent, I guess, that you will, that he had, whether it be a season or 3 ago. But I do think also this just sort of goes back, again, the churn word. We've talked about it so many times already on this podcast, but it just kind of goes back to that philosophy that they're just going to be bringing guys in. And it's all about, hey, we're going to churn this practice squad. We're going to churn the bottom of this roster. We are going to churn every element of this roster and position groups to make it as good as it possibly can be. So when you see them sign guys, the fan reaction might sometimes be less enthused than maybe normal on some other guys, like player to player. But I think, look at it holistically right now. This is a team that there are 90 guys on this roster essentially at the moment. And so they are trying to figure it all out. It is a brand new team. I do think it's important to maybe temper some expectations going into the season, because this is just new from top to bottom. But it is kind of cool in a sense that you have a new coaching staff with pretty much a brand new team that's kind of coming in, give or take like a few key players at very, very prominent positions. But I do think that, this is a time where they're just working through it, and don't live and die by the transaction, I guess, is kind of what I would say, and just sort of trust and have faith that, they're kind of working through their philosophy. And this, but again, it's new for all of us, right? Because we've been, seeing this Chargers team under one regime for a very long time, different coaches throughout the last like 10 plus years or so. But I don't know. I'm not sure it's really like a negative necessarily. I think more of it is like, so many of those guys, again, like Joe Ortiz brought in, like he has familiarity with from Baltimore. So, hey, like, why not give him a shot? And I think it's just going to be a team that's really, really predicated on competition and really trying to get the best out of everyone and building that key 53 come end of August and early September.
We got a couple more for you, and we'll get you out of here, Hayley. And I think you mentioned Brenden Rice. We talked about Quentin Johnston a bit. Let's talk about the receivers here for a sec, because I think the part that has Chargers fans excited is it feels like there's legitimate juice on this group that we haven't seen before. That's no shade to the guys we had previously, but there was some athleticism and speed and dynamic playmaking abilities that were just feeling a bit lacking in years past, which are now on this team in many different flavors. What are your expectations of the wide receiver room? Because it just is so different than we've seen here. And it seems a lot deeper, where the precipitous drop off from wide receiver 1-2 isn't nearly as wildly deep as it has been in years past.
I think deep is kind of a good way of sort of saying what I said earlier, which was like competitive. There are a lot of different, 31 flavors, if you will, of receivers on this team. And you added a guy like DJ Chark who has speed. And you said like, that's something that, the speed element. To me, also Darius Davis, like how does he get involved in this offense? And he's been kind of the deep guy at points during OTAs. I think for me though, I'm also very interested in, and we're not talking about him a lot, but Joshua Palmer is still here. Totally. And Joshua Palmer has obviously had some, injury history over the last couple of years. But when you have gotten to know him, as I have over the last few years, he is such a student of the game. And I think it was 2 years ago, he specifically told me he was watching like every cut up of Keenan he could possibly watch from Keenan's entire time in the NFL. And he was always in Keenan's ear asking him like, this release, that release, getting it out of this, and all these different things, and just really, really wanting to know. Well, Joshua now has the opportunity to be the number one and be the elder statesman in this receiver room. And so I just think also the fact that he has camaraderie with Justin Herbert, how, you know, building off of that. And so I think it's such an interesting group, but with so many new faces, we haven't really talked about the one guy who's been here the longest, and that's Palmer. Yeah. And so I just think it's going to be, again, really interesting to see how it all shakes out, and how we also I don't think we've heard from him yet and really get his thoughts on what this offense is like, and working with Coach Lyle and all these different things. And so I think, like you said, it's deep. There's going to be a lot of competition. I think this is a battle throughout camp too, that we're going to have to see unfold, because, you know, there are only so many roster numbers that can happen. They can, you know, a position group can obtain, but you're -2 already with the losses of Keenan and Mike. So, you know, those guys are out. So who now is going to kind of take these spots and fill these roles? And then who can also kind of be added to the mix? Who can really shine in terms of what can they show throughout camp and throughout the preseason, if need be, that can help them earn a spot? And I think when you look at position battles and you kind of look at what's to come this offseason, I think that's going to be a really, really interesting group to watch.
Last one, Hayley, and we'll get you out of here. I'm not sure how long on any of your segments that you go before you start mentioning number 10, but we just went about 34 and a half minutes without even talking about Justin Herbert. So we're going to finish with Justin Herbert on this one. Justin Herbert's now on his third head coach, his fourth offensive coordinator since being in the league. And I know it's early days in OTAs, and we all know how he approaches the game in general, but is there anything that you have seen from him, or, you know, just from the time that Harbaugh has arrived, or even from the draft, and in terms of gearing up for this time of year, gearing up for next season, that either a different approach that he is taking, just his philosophy going into this year? What have you seen from that perspective with Justin Herbert?
So we haven't directly heard from him yet, and I haven't specifically talked to him to get kind of his take on all of this, and I'm sure we will over the next couple weeks, especially with mandatory minicamp on the horizon. But I think, you know, watching kind of everything transpire on the field, it looks, again, very collaborative. And Greg Roman, when I sat down with him, and there's been a lot of discussion on this offense and how Justin Herbert's going to be incorporated, and you like to run the ball, all these things, right? He goes, look, our job as coaches is to identify the good that is there and bring it to life, and bring Justin Herbert to life. And so when you hear that, sounds great. And that sounds awesome. I think a huge element to this offense, yes, it's new. Yes, it's the umpteenth system that he's been in. But another thing that I don't think is being discussed enough is the return of Shane Day as quarterbacks coach, and someone who I know, and people within the building know, Justin Herbert has a very strong relationship with, and to bring him back into the fold. And I think that also says a lot about, look, I do not know if he was consulted on this hire by any means, but what I will, you know, kind of talk out loud is, I think it's cool that Jim Harbaugh recognized, like, hey, this guy and this coach had a great relationship. Let's bring in someone who he's familiar with to make this transition, this, again, umpteenth transition that he's been through, a little easier. And so watching the two of them out on the field, it's like old times, you know, from a couple of years ago. And so I think that familiar face is huge in terms of kind of bridging all of this together. And I think it's kind of cool. You know, I'm interested to kind of hear what he has to say about Harbaugh, especially as a former quarterback, and just how that kind of all like unfolds. But I just think, you know, it's a lot of new, obviously, and he's had a lot in his very still young career in the NFL. But I think hearing Greg Roman say those things, like, we all want, you know, what's the best, and it's our job to bring it to life, that's what you want to hear. And again, so early, and we will see what happens with this team and how this all unfolds. But I just think at this point, you know, he's now a vet, like a savvy vet, if you will. And when you lose guys like Keenan on this team, and even Mike, who had a few years on Justin, you know, Justin at what, season 5 now, this is 21, 2, 3.
Wild.
Yeah. You're getting up there, man. And this isn't like, not that the training wheels were ever on with him, because they came off immediately in week 2 of 2020. But you know, he's now like a true veteran on this team. And I think It'll be fun to see how it all comes together, and also just kind of fun to hear. But I do think the return of Shane Day has been really, really big. And I think it's been very cool to see someone like Jim Harbaugh, who could truly bring in, I'm sure, whoever he wanted to be in that role as quarterbacks coach, as the actual position coach for that group, to now bring Shane Day back and know that those two were pretty tight and have that familiarity there for Justin.
I will say maybe the most anticipated outstanding piece about the Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh relationship to me is come game day. Are they going to be doing like the pad, chest bump, fist thing? Because like Justin Herbert versus Jim Harbaugh, like those are very different types of personalities.
Yeah, very different people. Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious what that pregame, whatever it is, will be. Do you think that that's happening?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. Didn't happen yesterday. Didn't see that. I can tell you that much. There were no pre-OTA bumps, if you will. I do find it very interesting. He's in a gold non-contact jersey right now, which is like, it's very striking out there to see this like gold jersey, which is kind of cool instead of the normal like red ones that you see. So you can't miss him. Can't miss number 10 when he's out there on the field right now. But yeah, I think, I'm sure someone will ask that when he takes the podium, and I would bet money that, well, maybe I shouldn't say that, but that I would bet certain things that Justin Herbert would probably have a very, very smart retort on that, if you will. Probably.
Hayley, thank you so much for doing this. I know we covered a bunch here today, and you were fantastic as always. You just got done with Junior Colson and Ladd McConkey discussions. What are some of the things that Chargers fans can look forward to from you moving forward?
Yeah, we're trying to kind of sit down, hopefully, with a couple position coaches over these next few weeks before the break to mini camp. I'm trying not to name names because we're trying to get the asks in and everything like that. But
it's between us. No one needs to know.
No one's listening
us and all of our
nobody listens to this.
Yeah, but trying to maybe get some of those down and actually talk to maybe some of the guys behind the big guy, if you will. To see what it's like coaching on this staff and being around these players and kind of starting to see this all sort of come together.
I love it. Hayley Elwood, Chargers team reporter, you were fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. Friend of the show, you're always welcome. Maybe we'll get you on before next year during the offseason, because every time you come on, it's gold. So let's keep that sunshine gold alive.
Well, I appreciate it. Look, there's absolutely nothing to talk about today. So thanks for having me. This is true. Yeah, nothing going on in Chargers land. But no, seriously, thanks for having me. It's always fun joining you guys. And let's do it again.
Of course, for Hayley, Jake, myself, Chargers Unleashed, LA Football Network, thank you so much for tuning in. And we'll talk to you next on Chargers Unleashed.